Are you a woman in the corporate world striving to break barriers, challenge unconscious bias, and lead the way for women in leadership roles globally? If so, this is the podcast for you. Introducing Leading Ladies Who Lunch. The lunch hour is usually the time when colleagues get together for real, honest conversations about work, life, and everything in between. In each episode of Leading Ladies Who Lunch, we'll delve into insightful discussions and share actionable strategies to help you navigate corporate life. Co-hosted by me, Cece George, a leadership development architect and inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to share my experience and expertise on leadership, mentorship, and organizational intelligence to help you own your career.
And me, Rachel Lowndes, CEO and founder, imposter syndrome expert, and mindset coach at Rachel Lowndes Coaching and Consulting. Passionate about helping women conquer imposter syndrome and unleash their inner confidence to get the recognition and promotions they deserve.
Jam-packed with insightful conversations, expert advice, and inspiring stories from a diverse group, we'll explore how to overcome obstacles, shatter those glass ceilings, and build unshakable mindsets to unlock your true potential. So whether you're sipping a coffee or enjoying a meal at your desk, tune in for a no-host bar lunchtime chat. Episodes will be dropped every 2 weeks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, one conversation at a time.
Hello, and welcome back to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. Hey, Rachel. How's it going?
Oh, it's all good with me, Cece. Nice to see you again, as always. What's been happening?
Oh gosh, things are always so busy on my end between just, projects and family and keeping up with life. I've also making my best effort and trying to work on myself and upskilling myself. And I think I might have mentioned I'm taking this AI primer course and trying to keep up with that and just keep up with all the, ever evolving social landscapes and making sure I'm staying relevant. So that's what I mean by I'm trying to keep myself busy and keep up with life.
Yeah, right. I mean, it feels like there's always something new to learn, isn't there? And
Yes.
AI just is something that we've all got to get on board with. And so I use AI, but yeah, maybe I could do with a bit more info on that. I did attend a talk recently by someone here who is an AI specialist, and I learned quite a lot in that. So that was super interesting. But yeah, good on you. Got to
Oh,
keep up with the learning.
yeah. I think it's just kind of fun. I haven't actually taken a course maybe since graduate school, and that ended, a few years ago. So it actually just felt nice to be a student again. So there's that.
Talking of
So
learning.
yes, talking about learning for our listeners. Okay, Rachel and I thought we would offer a special masterclass series on the podcast, and we're very excited to present you with a two-part podcast special on public speaking, communication, and presentation. Okay,
Woo.
we are we are taking our years of experience presenting in front of audiences of all sizes and sharing what has worked well for us, as well as some of the mistakes that we've made and, of course, lessons that we've learned along the way. That's why today is going to be part one. We're going to dive right into the basics.
All right, so just quick caveat. I don't have years of experience of talking in front of audiences. You do, but I have spent the last few years learning public speaking skills, working with mentors and coaches on this. So I'm definitely happy to impart some of my wisdom, although you have way more than me.
Well, you know what? I still think that counts because you do have experience with it and you probably have more than you even think you give yourself credit for. All
Oh,
right.
probably. Yeah.
So, well, first of all, why are we investing time in this topic? Why should you care about public speaking and presentation/communication skills? Well, I honestly, I don't care what field you're in, but no matter where you are in your career or your job, you will need to at some point present yourself, right?
Mhm.
Your subject matter, your expertise to others.
Mhm.
And even if you find that you never have to do that, maybe at some point you have to give a speech, maybe at a social gathering in front of others. And those types of moments create a lot of anxiety for many people. And
Yeah.
even if you aren't delivering a message to hundreds or maybe thousands, it might just be three or five. The idea of speaking up in front of other people causes so much stress. I actually remember a friend of mine telling me recently that whenever she has to present at a
Mhm.
team meeting, and her team is maybe like five or six people, and it's virtual, it causes her so much anxiety the night before that she's laying in bed just going over her script and, you know,
Mhm.
obsessing over every little bit of detail.
Mm.
So it's one of those moments that can be very high stakes and it puts a lot of pressure on you to perform.
Mm.
And it also just might be the only chance that you have to influence someone to gain buy-in to your idea, maybe products, or maybe you just have this really large task of convincing someone to make a decision about something, and your speech is that deciding point. Or maybe you are really at that social setting, you're giving a speech like at a wedding or some other formal occasion. You want to make a good impression. So, no matter which way you looking at it, speaking up in front of others can cause stress and anxiety on so many fronts.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, whatever way you look at it, you need to have these skills in your career or business because the way we communicate our message and knowledge can have a huge impact on our success. And
Mhm.
selling is just communication. Selling isn't just for salespeople, it's for everyone.
Right.
Because as you say, whether you're selling a product or an idea or just a suggestion of, even like what place are we going to go for lunch, right? You are selling. And this requires you to have excellent communication skills if you're going to get the outcome that you desire. So, if you've ever had your ideas or lunch place suggestions rejected, then it's probably because you haven't mastered that art of communication in a powerful way, not because your
Mhm.
ideas or your suggestions are rubbish, right? That's really, we've really got to understand that it's the way we communicate that idea is how we get the outcome we want, not necessarily that our idea is rubbish. Sometimes they are, but like,
Be honest, sometimes they might just voice stink.
yeah.
You're right. Part of communication, depending on what your goal is, requires you to sell or pitch something. So, whether you're in a meeting, giving a speech, or just chatting with your colleagues, these are the skills that can make a huge difference in how you're perceived and how effective you are.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And as we're talking about this, I remember thinking back to the very first time I had to give a formal presentation in my career. I was in my early 30s and I was leading a very high stakes, high profile visibility project. And the project required that I had to get 14,000 physicians and clinical providers trained in a new clinical documentation system. And this presentation was for me to present my education and training plan to a room full of very senior clinical and non clinical leaders for a major healthcare system. Oh gosh, there must have been at least 100 in the room. So, whew, that the stress and anxiety was on. Let me tell you that.
I
But
bet.
true to myself, I prepared my PowerPoint, I had my data, I knew all the key points that I wanted to hit. I basically memorized it like a script. But I knew I didn't want to go up there at that on that podium and sound like a bot, right? So I started to record myself speaking and, I would record, watch, practice over and over. And that script just became second nature. I knew it by heart. I had it memorized. But the idea that this was going to be a very big moment for me, knowing all the key and influential stakeholders would be in the room who would also be looking at me for the first time. And I want to make a good impression thinking about the long term. It made me so nervous, more nervous than than I ever thought was possible. And I felt like the night before I was just going to throw up once I got on that stage. And I'm calling it a stage, but it was basically a platform, if you will.
Mm.
So I did have a coworker give me a bit of her time, And, I basically ran through the entire presentation and she gave me some really good actionable feedback after which I felt like really prepared me as much as I could. And, honestly, it was a huge success. I remember after that meeting was over, one of the leading physicians I was working with at the time walked over to me and a bunch of other people and said, "A star is born." But I also wondered, now thinking about it, if that was because I gave a good performance or if I was convincing and effective as a leader, thinking about executive presence, which we're going to talk about in part two. So, but whatever it is, I got the job done and it was a huge success. So, whew.
Good on you. Well done.
Well, what does your experience with public speaking look like for you?
Oh my goodness. Look,
Oh,
yeah, a few years ago, if you'd asked me to speak publicly, I would have said, "No, thanks. I'd rather die."
right.
And and that was true. My feelings about it. I mean, I'm talking about presenting in front of people here, right? Not, if you'd asked me to share a story in a a kind of social setting, I'm fine about that because
Sure.
that's easy enough for me to do. So the setting's important, right? But it's easy to
Mhm.
forget that we speak all the time and, most of the time we're good at it. But the idea of presenting to people in like the example you just used there, like that terrified me. So I shied away from public speaking. And that showed up in my career because I deliberately chose a job that did not require me to do anything of the sort.
Mm,
And,
okay.
even if, and that really kind of stunted my career as well, because if there was an opportunity, I would run away from it because I just couldn't
Right.
handle it. I was just so shy of being seen in public or being judged, imposter syndrome, people are going to find out that I'm no
Right.
good, etc., right? So I told myself the story I ran was I'm not good at public speaking, right? That was the story I
Mm,
had in my head. That was my belief. And that's what I stuck to. And what it came down to, actually, now I'm thinking about it, it's just popped into
very
my head,
common.
right? That when I was very young at school, primary, we call it primary school. I think you call it elementary there.
Yes.
I was chosen to be in the Wizard of Oz play, but I was the wizard, which meant I was inside a box the whole time. But I thought it was because I was no good at delivering the lines.
Oh, no.
I was chosen to be in the play, which no one, if you think about it, there's only
Right.
six parts. But yeah, that's just really popped into my head because I remember that very distinctly thinking, well, if
Wow.
I'm in this box and no one can see me, then I can't be very good. Right?
Ooh, what a message.
Wow, I've just had my own little moment there.
Right. Oh, man.
Right, but like getting back to what we are talking about, of course I wasn't very good at public speaking since then because I had no experience of it. I'd never put myself forward for it. So, instead of thinking, oh, this is something that I can learn, I just dismissed it as something that I didn't have, couldn't do, but others could do. Right. Now,
Mm,
I think this is probably a common experience for many people, which
mhm.
is, why I wanted to share my beliefs around my ability to speak in a public forum here today. Um, but starting a business means you can't avoid this stuff because you have to sell. I have to speak publicly, right? Whether I'm networking, whether I'm putting out content videos. Well, I do actually do presentations now. I do free events. I do like in-person events. It took me a very long time to get there, but I did it. So that was going to be a block to my progression and success. So I really had to work on that.
Right.
And I actually started with Toastmasters, which you're familiar with. Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
everyone. I'd never heard of Toastmasters until my best friend said, "Why don't you join Toastmasters?" I was like,
Right?
"What is that?"
Yes. Name Toastmasters too. I was like, what do they make
Okay,
toast of it?
Toasties. I call it Toasties.
Yeah.
Uh, so that was a really great start, actually, because they do have a very specific formula of like helping to get people to come out of their
Right.
shell. And then I went on to work with the Speakers Institute here in Australia. They're actually now in the US too, by the way. They're
Mm,
they're kind of on the West Coast. I think they're going to go to the East Coast. So I invested in their speakers 3-day boot camp and then in their year long mentorship program, which I'm currently still
Mm.
in. Amongst other things, I did, I've done free events. I've gone to 2 free events to watch people speak and sell from the stage. I've done that multiple times. I've seen the same people speak the same content multiple times because I've become a bit of a nerd about it. Uh, and I've aligned myself with mentors who are excellent speakers. So, like my coach Shani Taylor, who we had on the podcast earlier this year.
She was
I mean,
amazing.
one of the reasons we started this podcast was because I wanted to get more comfortable with publicly speaking, which in effect this platform is that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and so that's really helped me. So it's done its job in the ecosystem for me building my speaking confidence, and not just in presentations, but in all facets. So aside from the beliefs that are holding me back and learning how to communicate effectively and speak publicly, it's all about facing that fear and
Right.
taking action on the thing that you fear the most. Right? You simply cannot get good at something unless you do it. Right?
Right.
That's just the facts. So you have to get over the fear hurdle and you have to take small steps to build your confidence. And for me, that started with Toastmasters.
Absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. That was really helpful. And it reminds me about something that, and you've been really good about pushing me to do this, is to post more content just coming from me and sharing more about some of the
Mm,
things that I'm thinking about or experiencing and some of the knowledge that I've shared. And when I initially thought, when you first recommended I start doing that, I remember thinking, and I presented in front of people before, but again, we all have that inner critic that comes, gets in the way, and starts telling you all this crap. And I just
yeah.
remember thinking, oh man, what am I really going to say that is going to be meaningful? I mean, who wants to listen to what I have to say? I mean, right? That's what we
Mhm.
start thinking or telling ourselves these, untruths.
Yeah.
And I remember recently, again, you had nudged me, and I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna put a video out. If it's
Yeah.
horrible, fine. I learn from it. I'll get better. But let me just put something out and get rid of the perfection and focus more on the progress. So
Hmm.
progress over perfection.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's because that you've been nudging me to just just put it out there, and doing that is a way of getting over that inner critic telling you
Hmm.
you can't do something. And I
Correct.
think Shani, when we had her on the podcast, she said it best. You have to take action.
Hmm.
Saying you want to do something and not taking action towards it will result in the same thing of you wishing you only had started. So instead of
Yeah.
putting off that start, take the action and take a step towards what you want to do. And I tell people that too. My co-host, she's really good about those gentle nudges. She's really good about that. And they're like, "Man, you've got a great co-host." I'm like, "Dude, awesome." Sure.
That's me. Pushy, pushy.
In a
Well,
very loving way.
it's all about like encouraging in, a kind of not harsh way, but it's like if you don't do it, it's not going to happen, right? And
Exactly.
we've got to take that action because imagine if I'd not gone to Toastmasters, if I hadn't taken that step, I wouldn't be delivering paid in-person workshops. Like I delivered one last week to 30 people, you know what I mean? And like I never would have done that. I never would be delivering free events to my audience now. So it's all about that first step. And you
Right.
just have to. I was terrified getting up there. Talk about yourself for a minute. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? And this I love about Toastmasters, right? Everybody has to do that as a first step. And you're
Yes.
given a minute, and everybody thinks, oh, yeah, this is a minute, and it's 20 seconds.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I've got to fill the rest. It makes me think of when you put something in the microwave and you put it on for a minute. That is the longest minute in the world, right? And it's the
Totally.
same when you're doing that Toastmasters first step.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And for our listeners, so my experience Toastmasters is I heard about it through a friend, and then I eventually joined a club. And there are clubs all over. So if anyone's interested in joining a club, you can join these clubs. They're found all over the world. I remember going to Toastmasters and thinking, okay, so how does this work again? And then eventually it's really just about practicing, practicing, practicing. Every role you take on in a Toastmasters meeting, whether you're a timer or you're a grammarian or you're a joke teller or you're giving a speech is an opportunity to practice. And
Mhm.
practice is what helps you get more comfortable with standing up and speaking. And that's
Yeah.
what I found has really also helped me a lot is just getting the practice of standing up and speaking. So yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I'm right there with you. So, okay, so we've shared some of our experiences. Now let's talk through some strategies. So, what are some key tips for what I think would be great public speaking? And this it might vary person to person, but I'm going to throw out a couple of things that I've been noodling on and thinking about as I've been growing this skill of mine, right? So the first thing I'm going to add here is, and I've learned this, well, the easy way and the hard way is you have to know your audience.
Mm.
Now, because I presented to all different kinds of audiences, and by that I mean I've presented to people who are in healthcare, who are in finance, who are in retail, who are all different levels of leadership and non-leadership. I've learned how important it is to tailor your message to their interests and level of understanding. So in the story that I shared earlier about my very first presentation, knowing there were 100 clinical and non-clinical leaders meant that I had to speak and tailor my message so each group got the message I intended for each of them. But I also had to make sure that I made it relevant for each of them so that if it would mean so much more, and I had to make sure that I kept them both engaged through the content that I was sharing. And that's not easy. It really takes a lot of time to, refine your message to make sure
Mhm.
that your intended message and what you need out of them will happen. It's very
Oh,
difficult.
yes. Oh, 100%. I think that's actually something that you develop over time. The more and more you do speaking, the more comfortable you
Right.
get with the kind of base content because
Mhm.
relevance is key here. And the only thing the audience cares about is what's in it for them,
Right.
right? And, why do they care about this topic? And what's the one thing that you really want them to take away? Because they're really only going to take one thing away. So you've got to make sure that you land it. And as you say, like tailoring that message to your audience is a skill I think that you just really develop the more and more you speak. It's something I'm still working on. So
For
just know
sure.
that it's something you have to keep working on.
Right. And that takes practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is actually my second point that I'm
Yeah.
going to add here is to prepare and practice. I think rehearsing your speech multiple times will build confidence. But I'll also say that confidence also comes from knowing your content really well. And you have to be comfortable with it and confident in what you're saying. When I
Mm,
gave my first keynote to 300 healthcare leaders, I spoke about appreciative inquiry, which is a topic that I know a lot about. I did research on, I was introduced to it more than a decade ago. And I had rehearsed and practiced that 45-minute keynote probably at least 30 times before I got up in front of my intended audience. But because I also was comfortable with the topic, I always knew that if I ever got stuck in the middle of my keynote, I know how to fill it in because I knew the content. So if you
mm.
know your content, you know the subject matter, you have all your data or whatever your goal of the presentation is, that will all lead to your confidence in when you're presenting. So it'll just mean that you're very natural and relaxed. And believe me, that shows, that comes across as someone who's listening to you speak. The audience can always tell if you know your stuff and if you're confident. So when I was practicing that very first speech, and even in the speeches I've delivered after that, I've been able to build a trusted group of advisors and people in my network that I would say, hey, do you have a couple of minutes? I can run this by you. And I'm really looking for some feedback on, A, B, and C, whatever it was that I knew I had to work on. So getting actionable feedback to help you improve. And also just watching yourself, recording yourself and watching how you deliver it and looking out for the things that you have to work on and just even giving yourself an objective eye will all mean that that delivery is so much smoother.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes you can, know your content and still forget parts. That happened to me the other day. And
Sure.
I was just like, as long as you kind of still landing your points, I think that's okay. I walked away and went, oh, I forgot that a little bit, but that's okay because I kind of repeat things throughout my
Yes.
presentation. So repeating points is like you're still going to land the point.
Yes.
So I just wanted to add that. But I mean, part of the preparation process is also actually learning stage presence. So this is
Mhm.
also known as story showing. So don't tell, just you show as well. And so bring the audience into your content by using those personal stories or stories that they can see themselves in and relate to, and then act them out on stage. Right? You don't have to be too performative, like that's a bit weird.
Right.
But using the stage as your canvas, as well as specific movements are going to demonstrate the point because people are visual, so we do need to have a visual representation of the stories we're showing and movements to demonstrate points. They actually teach some of this in Toasties. I like to call it Toasties, but
I
but
love
I, of course, because I'm Australian. But I would recommend reading a book written by Sam Cawthorn, who is the founder of the Speakers Institute, called Story Showing, to
Mm.
get a better understanding of this concept. He kind of maps it out really simplistically. It's really easy to understand.
Yes.
So
Okay.
yeah, if you are interested in building your stage presence a bit more and making your presentations a bit more dynamic, then I would recommend reading that book, and I can find a link for it and put it into the show notes as well for people.
Great reference. Yeah,
Mm,
story showing, not telling. You're right about
mm,
that. Bringing them into your story and how you reveal that. And I think what I've also learned just through practice and just working with different people on presentation styles is the way that you anchor people in your message. So part of how you prepare is, the gentle anchors you build within your message for people to grab onto. So if,
mm,
if you were to ask me, give, tell me a 5-minute speech about your career history. I probably would start by saying, well, at the beginning of my career, I focused mostly on building my corporate skills and professional skills in the field of human resources. In the middle of my career, I've been really honing in on learning and leadership development. And towards the end of my career, I really foresee myself in a coaching and consulting type of role. When I
mhm,
just by using that beginning, middle, and end is actually a good way just to anchor the person, the audience in your message. They're listening for the, oh, she said beginning. What's coming next? The middle.
mm,
Oh, what's coming next? You're giving them something to hook onto. So it just reminded me when you're showing, there's different ways and different methodologies you can incorporate on how you reveal that story by bringing them with those nudges.
mhm. The
The
story
question
time.
I had is that, and this is probably something that I think people would tell you anyway, but I think it's hard because you think that you have to put on a performance, is to be yourself. And sometimes you think when you're expected to perform, how can you be yourself? And you might even be thinking of examples of great speakers and think, oh, well, I'll take this example from that person and I'll do this special thing that they do. But I think when you're speaking in front of others, you have to do what comes natural to you. You have to show up authentically. So this requires knowing yourself and, more importantly, being comfortable in your skin. And whatever you have to do to be comfortable in your skin when you are presenting and up on a stage, whether you're standing and sitting from where you have to do what's comfortable for you. For me, when I know I have to give a really high stakes presentation, I have to get up somewhere, I like to get a new outfit or find an outfit that just makes me feel really good and really confident. And that's what I need to get up and be confident and to be who I am, is to have something that I'm wearing that makes me feel good. So I'm reminded of I can show up as who I am now.
Mm,
So whatever you have to do to ensure that you can stand up there and be yourself. And also that part of that also means avoiding the tendency to fidget. So when you're not comfortable, the audience can tell. If you're standing up on a stage or giving a speech and you're maybe playing with your fingers, or maybe you were holding some presentation cards and you're like flipping through them, or you're fiddling with them, or maybe you've got, certain like arm placements. All of these things are noticeable to the audience. So it indicates that maybe you're not so comfortable.
yeah,
Also it also translates to how quickly you speak. When you're not comfortable, you tend to speak very fast and you might ramble. So
Mhm.
we have to be intentional with the pacing of our words and also how fast we're speaking and the kind of words that we're using because it
Yeah.
all shows at the end.
Yeah, totally. I just wanted to touch actually on what you mentioned there about what you're wearing. I think as a speaker, it's quite useful, particularly as women, to wear like a powerful color so that you stand
Mm,
out on stage. So I like to wear like either a bright red blazer or a blue
nice.
blazer so that people can see me,
Mm,
especially if I'm going to be walking around on the stage as well. They need to know that I'm the person of, I'm the authoritative person at that point. The other thing I would add here is that, remember to ground yourself and breathe too. This is so important when you're
mm,
speaking because, before a speech, you are going to get nervous. That is completely and utterly normal. Even the best speakers in the world do have a bit of nerves. That's a normal human thing to do. Now, the best thing to do is to get that nervous energy out of you. So you could move around, you could dance if you have to. Like recently, when I was driving to the presentation that I just did last week, I recognized I had a bit of nervous energy in me. So I was dancing in the car on the way there. Well, I don't care who sees me. I've got to get this nervous energy out of me. And I could feel it leaving my body afterwards. So that's a really important thing to understand is that the nerves you're feeling are going to tighten your body up and they're going to tighten your breath up and chest and really your throat as well. So get that nervous energy out of you and then ground yourself before you go onto the stage in inverted commas with some diaphragmatic breathing, which is
mhm,
breathing that goes down into your tummy, not your chest, because we tend to breathe in the top part of our lungs and that just holds more kind of nervous energy. It keeps us restricted. So if we breathe down into our tummies, do that diaphragmatic breathing and look it up if you need to. That really helps expand and calm the nervous system down. So place your feet firmly down on the ground, take a deep breath to ground, and then start.
absolutely. I'm so happy that you talked about the breathing because I've noticed also in the breathing, even the times when I've gotten nervous up on stage, it's because I wasn't using intentional pauses to breathe. And which the
Mm,
intentional pause, it not only gives you a chance to breathe, it also gives your audience, listener, a chance to let your message really soak in instead of
mm.
you going exactly from one thought to the next. So the breathing is so important. And it sounds really simple, but for some reason, we always manage to forget to do that when we're up there. So that
Yes.
time to pause and to breathe. They will still be there. Don't worry. Speaking of some mistakes or things that we would try to avoid, I would also, when you're thinking about even just how you put your presentation together, if you're going to use PowerPoint slides or slides, try to give as much information as possible, but don't overcrowd your slides. People aren't actually going to, if you have a whole lot of bullet points with a bunch of words, people are going to very quickly get lost in what you're saying because they're too focused on reading every single thing the line
Yeah.
says. Really try
Simple as
to simple is better, keep it simple and maybe use more imagery to tell your story.
visuals.
As you
Yeah,
have the visual, you can speak to what that visual represents or what it means. And
absolutely.
try to avoid reading from your notes. This is where the practice and preparation comes into it, but try to avoid reading your speech word for word because it does sound robotic and it makes it seem like you're not relating to the audience because you're so focused on getting every single word from your sentence out into the air. So try to avoid, just doing the word for word reading.
Yeah.
And don't ignore the audience. Part of being a good, effective speaker is also gauging how your audience is reacting to your speech. So if you feel like you're starting to lose people, try to find ways to engage them. I would try to prepare for that upfront by putting in a poll or a quiz or even throwing out thought-provoking questions, rhetorical questions that maybe doesn't require an actual response, but gets them to stop and think. So try to engage your audience in different ways because if
Mhm.
you're also not giving them a chance to absorb what you're saying, as I mentioned before, it's just going to go over them. And I did say this already, but just try to avoid when you're not breathing, you also may have a tendency to talk too fast. So try to just slow it down and really just try not to rush through the entire presentation. It makes the whole thing go that much smoother.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, it's like, don't try to wing it, right? You have a responsibility to your audience to show up with respect and preparation. So don't try to wing it isn't a strategy for success, trust me. And remember,
Mhm.
you are the expert. So if the nerves hit, remember they are there to listen and learn from you, and you are there to help them to understand.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we've spent a lot of time talking about public speaking and presentation communication skills. And our hope is that you can take away these insights from today's episode. All right, prepare. Make sure you really try to prepare for speaking up, whether it's in front of a team meeting, a large boardroom presentation, or even a social gathering speech. Your success will definitely depend on how prepared you are. So know your audience, know your material, get your fit right, or whatever will add to your confidence that day, and be yourself.
I'm going to throw in here too that speaking isn't something you just know how to do. You have to learn it. It's a skill. That's it, right? So if you're telling yourself you can't, then it's worth investigating where that belief comes from first, like in the example I used earlier about me in the school play, because if you don't believe in yourself, then it's going to show. And then also ground yourself with breathing and use movement to manage the nerves pre-speech.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening to this episode of the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. If we can leave you with a thought, how are you going to ensure you are successful the next time you have to give a speech or a presentation? If you like this episode, we would be so grateful if you can share it with your friends and tag us on social media at Leading Ladies Who Lunch. Your reviews of this podcast mean so much to us. We'd love it if you can rate it and subscribe to the show.
Remember, you can find us and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other podcast platforms. Subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes and follow us on Instagram at Leading Ladies Who Lunch.
Stay tuned for part 2 in 2 weeks.
Until then, stay sassy. Thank you for joining us on the empowering journey at the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our insightful discussions, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that we break down during each episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Leading Ladies Who Lunch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And remember, the conversations you've heard on this podcast are just the beginning of your journey. Let your voice be heard, inspire change, and continue breaking barriers as you lead with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering determination.
Until next time, keep embracing your leadership potential, challenging the norms, and shaping a better world for women in the workplace. Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, changing lives.